This week in Pure Reinvention.
In my decade plus of leadership, that's some of the best advice I can give anybody, that when you're comfortable, you're not going anywhere. And when you're having those uncomfortable conversations with people that you don't know or that you think are oppositional, that's where growth happens.
Episode 96, Ken Toll, President and Chief Executive Officer, United Way of Jackson County.
Engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Welcome to this episode of Pure Reinvention, where we create space for the unexpected by inspiring a reinvention lifestyle. I'd like to again thank our co-host, Mindy Braidishorta, for taking the time out to be here. Thank you, Mindy.
You're welcome. It's an honor.
Mindy, you introduced us to a wonderful man by the name of Ken Toll.
Yes, Ken Toll is the president and CEO of our United Way in Jackson County, and he has just this recent year taken United Way from focusing on raising a whole bunch of money to do good to specifically helping to end poverty and create financial stability for people.
And he had a couple of really interesting comments that I think our listeners should listen for. One was how he looked at growth in uncomfortable situations.
Yeah, he really appreciates uncomfortable moments and situations, so it'll be interesting to hear about that.
Yes, let's listen now.
This week's episode is sponsored by HRM Services, providing solutions that work. HRMS provides customized human resource consulting services to fit the unique needs of their clients. Every client has a story, and they make it their business to learn yours. Contact HRM Services today at 517-974-8033 or visit their website at hrmservices.biz.
We start all of our guests off with the same three basic questions. So are you ready?
I think so.
Of the 5 steps in the reinvention process, which step do you most closely associate yourself with?
You know, after doing this job for more than a decade, I can say I'm in all 5 at all times. But most closely, I think I'm a connector. Definitely, that's my sweet spot in this deal.
Ken, what is your superpower?
I would have to say that I am able to lead while keeping peace.
That in itself is an art as well, isn't it?
I don't know if it really qualifies as a superpower, but yeah, it feels like it on some days.
And when is the last time you found yourself in an uncomfortable situation?
You mean besides today? I've had 3 media interviews, and I'm really not a great media speaker. A couple of weeks ago, we had some political push and pull in one of our coalitions. We were trying to decide a big decision for our financial stability network. And there were some very valid competing interests on both sides. And when it boils down to a political decision, not a data-driven decision, I get very uncomfortable with that.
Sure.
Data makes it a lot easier for us to see the light. And when it's politics, you get layers of controversy, layers of people involved, and it gets a little bit more tricky.
Tell us a little bit about the work that you do, specifically how you've been able to change the mindset of what the end result of your work should be.
Great. Yeah, I can't take credit for any original ideas with the United Way. We're very fortunate that we have about 1,600 members around the country, and each one is independently owned and operated. United Way is the least hierarchical national organization you'll find out there. We are driven by community needs, by community data, and led by community people. So, when I came on board, it was a very interesting time for United Way. We were reorganizing from that giant fundraiser that just raised as much money as possible to something better. How do we actually achieve community impact? We've been reading a lot about how a lot of philanthropic dollars over the years have been donated, but we haven't seen the kinds of positive change you'd expect for that much capital. And so we took it upon ourselves as a system 15 years ago to change. That United Way was in a good leadership position to say, same old isn't working. We have to own that. And how do we move forward with something new? So our United Way was putting out some interesting thoughts, interesting ideas that were different. And I was, as a new leader, I was in a great position to jump on some of those. I grabbed my honeymoon period with my board of directors and made some pretty quick changes. And from there, we just kept building and snowballing, fortunately making a lot of the right choices. And we've evolved tremendously over the last 15 years.
So what was that one big, simple change in focus?
I would say it was figuring out who the customer is. United Way struggled with who is our customer. Is it the donor? Is it the nonprofit that gets our money? Is it the companies that we work through to get to the donors? It's still an ongoing debate in United Way. But we really focused in on those donors, that the individual wants to see their philanthropy philanthropic muscle doing some good, and we have to directly connect them to that, not through multiple layers of machinations or giving federations, but very directly, how do we show the impact of that work?
And how do you determine what the donor wants to see as an end result?
We talk to them a lot. Communication is key, and that's something nonprofits are horrible at in general. Dan Pallotta has done some interesting conversations around nonprofit constraints, and one of his big points is that communication is overhead, and donors don't like to see overhead. But if you have to tell them what you're doing with their dollars, that's communication, that's overhead. And nonprofits had to get over that hump of, let's make sure we shave off that 0.5% operating overhead, and instead, let's communicate better, let's really engage our donors, let's listen more, and let's involve them in the solutions, not only in giving, but in actually creating the solutions
So
as well.
you really looked at a very simple change in methodology, which was to introduce or to enhance the amount of communication that was taking place in order to really help people understand.
Yeah, that was probably the most fundamental improvement we made.
So when you do that, when you really enhance the amount of communication that takes place, what kind of benefit did you receive?
I would say a certain clarity. There was a lot of conversation around who, again, should United Way serve, and why would I support this group if it's not giving to XYZ or my favorite charity? And we were able to leave a lot of that baggage behind and say, this is what we're doing. We are not all things to all people. We did some donor surveys, and we asked 500 different people, what does United Way do? We literally got 500 different answers, and that's not good for any business brand to have that discontinuity.
Exactly.
And now we're getting much more consistent answers. We're creating community-level change, but we also upped our game. Instead of just looking at a handful of independent agencies, we said, how do we create systems level improvements in this community? Because that's what's needed. You know, we're taking on big root cause problems now, and those root causes require a systems change, not just a new program or 2 new agencies in town.
So you had mentioned that you felt that your superpower was connect. But I'm going to guess that you would also say you had to go through this reinventive communication focus in order for there to be clarity for you to start connecting.
Yeah, I've always felt like a good interpersonal communicator, but when I'm dealing with thousands and thousands of donors, I can't sit down and have coffee with every single one every year. So you're right. We had to sort of develop new routes to that kind of communication, but still have that rich interpersonal exchange where it's meaningful, not just a one-off that, hey, we're here this year, but really, what do you think about this issue? Should we be tackling it? And how do we do that most effectively?
And then does that focus on the communication and why you are there start to then create greater meaning in how you can connect to those next generation deliverables?
The communication sort of draws you a map. When you start hearing from enough different areas that this is where you need to go, that's where you go. You don't question it anymore. You don't look for more data. A lot of avenues opened up to us with this communication. A lot of the Simplify Act happened, I think, because of these communications. And when I went through your 5 points before this interview, I thought, simplifying is what I'm worst at. But through the art of conversation, through all this feedback, it became very clear to us what we could leave behind and where we could go forward.
And that became very interesting as I was listening to you kind of talk about this, that the ability to clarify through listening, a very simple understanding of where your focus should be, then allowed you to then start to connect or reconnect in very different ways based on that feedback from your customers.
I couldn't have said that better. Absolutely.
Well, and so for those people listening to this podcast, I'm hearing you say that the journey that you're describing began with that strong listening tour to really get the clarity of understanding of what this market was saying to you.
Yeah. So, I'm a big believer in the collective impact methodology of solving problems. And what collective impact says is you may not even know where you're going, but if you don't take the first step, you're not going to get there. So take some small steps, do some rapid prototyping and some testing, get some feedback loops going, and seize the opportunities that are lowest first and build upon those. And I think that's exactly what we've done.
Ken, do you think that maybe one of the reasons that people are not as interested in starting this listening tour is because the fear that it will be there will be overwhelming information that they'll have to sort through? Because I really liked what you were saying about start small. Start with things that are much easier to digest and then work up to those areas that may be a little bit more complex.
Yeah, there were definitely times when it felt overwhelming in my chair, and my staff would frequently come to me. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes to see what's real communication, what's real concerns, and what's just an outlier or a diverse opinion that you can sort of park in the parking lot for a while. But that gives you opportunities to go back and continue the conversation. And I talked about our customers. What we've discovered is the more we talk, the more our customer base grows. We have partnerships now with governmental entities, with service clubs, with individuals, with faith groups that we wouldn't have had 15 years ago because we knocked on their door and started talking about this, and they started to see their opportunities and get excited and come aboard. So
basically you started to not limit yourself to who you should be talking to. You started talking to everyone.
Yeah, I've never been one to limit myself by who I should talk to, actually. I don't know what the United Way did prior to my being there, but that's probably a fair characterization.
And probably we would say that of the people who have limited market or limited opportunity, one of the things that we would encourage is to start talking to others outside of your current network, outside of your current scope, and build connections and listen to people that are not a part of your normal day-to-day.
In my decade plus of leadership, that's some of the best advice I can give anybody, that when you're comfortable, you're not going anywhere. And when you're having those uncomfortable conversations with people that you don't know or that you think are oppositional, that's where growth happens.
Now, Ken, you had mentioned that the area that always is a little bit uncomfortable for you is that area where the conversation is more political as opposed to data-driven. Can you walk us through, for those of us that are more data-driven, but you need to be mindful of the totality of messaging that goes on, how you've been able to learn how to balance that?
Well, I'll give you a case that's happening right now that I haven't quite figured out how to balance. In Jackson, our city has taken a very strong stance to tear down some old dilapidated houses. The city makes the argument that they're very expensive to rehab, and it's just not worth putting $40 or $50 or $60,000 into a house that will only be worth $30,000 after all that. At the same time, we have a lot of folks who are housing insecure and don't have a place to live, and it's very difficult to watch houses. We're up over 600 now, I think, in the city limits that have been torn down over the last couple of years. Yet we have people waiting for Section 8 housing, for subsidized housing. People are homeless. And that's a bit of discordance that I see. There are multiple agendas at play here. There's MISTA, the State Housing Development, has very prescriptive rules, which sometimes I think stifle some creativity that we could be doing. And I think there are some people working on that, which is a great improvement. But you have that tempered with city council members who have to represent certain constituencies, some of which would love to tear down a big chunk of Jackson, and others which want to preserve it and make it a very historical, quaint town. It's hard to know where the real agendas are when you're working with this many layers and this many people. So United Way is often asked, what are we going to do about housing? And my answer is, we need a solution and we're working on it, but we still have a lot more dialogue to do. We need to really explore what we can do with the public assets out there. How many of them can we advocate to change and redirect in more useful fashion? And we need to do a little bit more homework before we wade into the whole should we be tearing down houses argument. But it's coming, and it's something that we need to have an opinion on soon.
Ken, what is your thoughts on with all these divergent opinions of how the same thing should be done? What is your internal voice saying to you about the importance of a leader bringing a clear, simple message to everyone that starts to get everyone moving in a more unified direction?
Yeah, again, the simplicity is the hard part there, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I start with a very high moral ground that we are the richest nation in the country. We have 40% of the world's resources. We don't have 40% of the world's population. Why the heck can't we get people in houses? It's a basic need. It's one of the fundamental things that we talk about, from our earliest days in school. What do you need to survive? Food, clothing, and shelter. Why can't we figure out shelter yet? Let's push back on our moral imperative, our humanity, to say the situation we're in right now isn't good enough. And even if we don't have all the answers, let's keep working on finding them, because turning your back on that is not going to help. The problem just gets worse every time you look away.
On one side of the coin, it appears to be a task that has no answer. On the other side of the coin, I get the impression you are the kind of a leader that's relentless in your pursuit of finding the answer. How do you continue to keep yourself energized to find some of these correct, simplified solutions in the face of enormous energy needs and disruption?
That's a great question. And I'll even take it back a step. I hate to fundraise, and I'm the CEO of the big fundraiser in town. you do it for the mission, right? That it's infuriating to me that we still have these problems. I'm very quite a student of equity and equality, and I think that we have a long way to go in this culture. And that's really what drives me. That even a small win, a small victory, a small program starting up, or a change in rules fuels people and gets them excited and makes them realize that they can do more. So again, you start small and build that, and people start coming alongside you, and they give you that momentum. They give you that energy to keep going. If everyone I talked to said you're full of it, I would step down and go wash cars or something for a living. But as long as people are there saying, right on, you're doing the right thing and we're going to help you, I think we can do anything as people when we have that much support from others, that connection.
Do you think that one of your main priorities in the reinvention of this challenge is to message this mission over and over and over to get more people to believe, as you believe, that there is an answer to this?
So when you look at United Ways as having that philanthropic outlet, some folks know exactly what they want to do with their philanthropy. Others simply know that they want to help. And those are the ones where you can start channeling and leading them into some clear solutions. What we found, though, as we've moved into this issue of financial stability, our United Way is now 100% focused on ensuring that people can become financially stable, that we tear down these roadblocks and remove the pitfalls in poverty and give people a hand up and a clear pathway to self-sufficiency. What we found time and time again is that human spirit is alive, that people do want to improve their situation. It's just a lot of folks after a generation or two of failures don't trust the systems that are there to help. And if we show them that these are new systems, these are new partners, we are ready to help, I think people will gladly put in blood, sweat, and tears to improve their financial gains.
What I heard you say was people are ready for the reinvention of a lot of these processes
I
to deliver different results.
I think our presidential race is a good testament to that. I think people are ready for something.
Yes.
A big change.
Yes. Ken, how can people get a hold of you if they're interested in the work that you're doing?
Our website is uwjackson.org, United Way of Jackson, or our phone number is 784-0511. We welcome telephone calls, emails, visitors. Love to talk to people about what's going on. So please feel free to shoot me an email, ktoll@uwjackson.org, or just give us a call.
A leader leading reinvention in a very important area. Ken, thank you. This was marvelous.
It's been my pleasure, Mike.
Another episode with really, really great content, Mindy.
It was.
Mindy, I want to go back and talk about how Ken mentioned that growth happens in uncomfortable situations.
I think as humans, we tend to avoid uncomfortable situations and conversations. It's hard and awkward, and we don't want always to have that conflict. But for him to actually enjoy that and find value in what they can provide is a good lesson for all of us.
I think in a very physiological type of thought process, when we work out, our muscles tear a little bit, we rest, they heal, but they heal back stronger, which is how we build muscle, how we build endurance is through that small push into new areas where we actually have some pain, and then we learn. And I think what Ken has reminded me of certainly is we don't really grow until we have a chance to be in a situation which feels uncomfortable, where we are using all of our experiences to kind of navigate through this time. And in doing so, we actually discover we have another gear in us.
Yeah, that's a really good way of describing it. And even if we don't take the time to reflect on how that conversation went, what we could have done differently, I think because we have pushed and stretched that muscle, we learn subconsciously inherently anyway, and that's great because humans don't always take the time to reflect like Ken was talking about. But I think that taking time to have conversations that are not always fun and can be very difficult can lead to a much more progressive, easier way of doing things. And I also really liked how Ken referred to it as a roadmap.
Right. I think the roadmap, to me, began to suggest that if you are starting to enter a new space, and certainly with Pure Reinvention, we are encouraging people to go into a new space where there is not a roadmap. I think Ken has reminded us that the roadmap emerges through the conversations and the communications that are going on within your sphere of activity. So if it's your marketplace, if it's your staff, if it's your board, if it's just out there in the world where you are listening and building that map, I think if we do a better job of putting ourselves in new places where there's new thought, we're able to fill in this blank map with that information. It's out there. I think the really question is, are we listening and are we at a spot in our own development where we can receive it and use it to build the what's next?
Yes, and I like how it adds the clarity. I think he really emphasized that word, that roadmap gives you a clarity of, and I really liked also how he said, of clarity of not where you're going, but what to leave behind.
Well, there's another interesting thought, because if we are moving into a new space, we tend to focus on what's in front of us. That's almost survival, right? Where am I going to put my next step? What are we going to do? And to me, the very powerful thought is not where are you as the leader putting your next couple of steps, but are you really paying attention to that road you are paving behind you and what that means to the people that are following.
And that leave behind is not just important for the people coming behind for the community, but think of the staff, think of the board volunteers, everyone that's going to step in when that leader is gone and continue down that path. And is it going the right direction? Is there enough direction? Are there enough road signs that people know we turn here, we pause here, we yield? And that is the legacy that a real, true leader leaves behind. It's not just their personal legacy of this is my name and I've made my mark. It is the legacy that the community, the organization, the people that are following truly have a destination. They know where they're going with clarity.
If you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it pure reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter @Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.